BBC Radio 4 Extra.
And now, the last of our series, Why Robot? Inspired by Isaac Asimov's 3 Laws of Robotics, Sheila Steafel reads The Companion by Anita Sullivan.
Catherine bought the robot for her mother Eunice's 70th birthday. She chose a companion series humanoid from lifebots.com. It was programmed to recognise the warning symptoms of stroke and cardiac arrest. It was uplinked to the NHS hub, could dispense medicines to prescription, and was strong enough to lift a 20-stone man. It could also play bridge. Research had shown that older customers prefer their robots to look like robots. So unlike the Lifebots Leisure or Pleasure series, companion models have exterior joints and are mechanised by hydraulics. They sigh gently as they move. Their cranium is smooth, and below the suggestion of forehead and nose, a speaker vent serves for a mouth. Their torso has no musculature, no belly button, and absolutely no nipples. The sunglass eyes blink at a slightly slower rate than a human blink, and the on-off switch glows comfortingly in the dark. Robots aren't cheap. Catherine bought one second-hand and reconditioned from a reputable dealer. The companion arrived in a tall box with a thick manual. Catherine ripped open the cardboard and polystyrene balls cascaded onto the rug. The companion stood upright in his cardboard casket, emitting a slight whiff of new car. This particular model was called Colin, and Catherine had ordered him in metallic brown. This had been a popular colour for domestic appliances in the 20-teens. Catherine thought Eunice would find this retro look reassuring. Eunice was not reassured. She said the robot's angular body and dark eyes made it look like a TB victim. She should know. She'd worked in an HIV clinic in Natal. She didn't need a companion, she didn't need a home help, and could Catherine please take it away? Catherine would never contradict her mother, but therapy had given her the confidence to reason with her. The companion robot would halve the service charge on Eunice's sheltered accommodation. All Eunice had to do was stand him in a corner and dust him occasionally. Was that really so much to ask? Catherine didn't mention the most compelling reason, Eunice's newly diagnosed arrhythmia, but it was agreed the robot would stay. According to the cover letter, Colin would boot up with standard settings, run systems checks, and initiate his uplink. Eunice retreated to the far side of the room. Clearly it would fall to Catherine to push the button. For a silent second, nothing happened. Then, with a tiny hydraulic sigh, Colin opened his eye shutters. Deep behind the dark lenses, a pale gold glow ignited. It seemed to run through the robot's body, and the metallic paintwork shimmered. For a dizzying moment, Eunice felt she wasn't watching a machine becoming operational. She was watching the reverse of death. Colin moved his head slowly, left to right, up and down, then looked directly at Eunice. He blinked, slowly. "I'm Colin," he said. The voice was so fluid and gentle it seemed to float directly into her mind without involving the ears. She froze, astonished. "Thank you for choosing Lifebots, a friend for life," Colin then chirped. The corporate script jarred. It was as if the magician had taken off his jacket to reveal the apparatus of trickery. She felt an irrational flicker of loss. Meanwhile, Catherine had been reading the manual. Eunice should introduce the robot to the domestic environment with a few simple commands. This would assist Colin's voice recognition. Eunice shook her head violently. No, she would not. She would not engage in any form of conversation with a bloody machine. She said this in Afrikaans, her language of choice for swearing and insults. "Bly te kenne, wat is jou naam?" responded Colin politely in an educated Joburg accent. It was the first time Catherine had ever seen her mother lost for words. Catherine laughed. Eunice erupted in all 4 of her official languages. If the robot had to stay, he was not permitted to speak. Ever! After the shouting, after Colin had been cornered, after Katrin had swept up the polystyrene, swept into her coat and out of Eunice's life for another 12 months, Eunice took a deep breath. She poured herself a crack shot of brandy and ran a very hot bath. Stripped in the steaming bathroom, she wiped a window into the mirror and appraised the woman before her. The face mapped her life. Laughter lines, sunspots, crow's feet, eyebrows scarred from a jellyfish sting, lips taut from holding back. The body was a landslide, hollow where it used to be rounded, domed where it used to be flat. She was old. She turned from the mirror, and as she climbed into the bath, she steadied herself with both hands, no longer trusting all of her weight to one hip. As she lay back, she was aware of every vertebra. She closed her eyes. Perhaps Katrin was right. Age was more than skin deep. Hidden from view, organs had migrated, cells had supernovaed, gone rogue. At any moment, life's delicate balance could shift and pitch her into the abyss. But deep in the dark, a gold light flickered. She opened her eyes. The robot stood above her. He was holding a folded towel. The part of her that should have yelled didn't. Woman and machine looked at each other. Then Eunice sat up, stood up, stepped out of the bath, naked. Brandy and humidity made her light-headed, and she allowed her hand to rest on the robot's forearm. It was warm from the ambient heat, solid as a stone. She took the towel. The robot took a small step backwards and dropped his gaze. When Eunice went to bed, the robot followed her. She thought she understood why. She popped 4 pills from 3 different packets and downed them in front of him without water. The robot nodded, but continued to stand at the foot of the bed. He held out a monitor pad and pointed to his own chest, just below where the collarbones would meet. Eunice hesitated, sighed, then took the pad and placed it over her heart. The robot retreated to the corner of the room. Silently throughout the night, it would run observations. Eunice woke towards dawn, as she sometimes did, with a sensation of something pressing down on her chest. But this time she couldn't seem to sit up, couldn't draw breath. As her panic mounted, she felt the pressure increase, and a heavy metal hand pushed through her ribcage and squeezed tight around her heart. She screamed. The robot was standing in the corner, inert, but his eyes glowed soft gold in the gloom. Just a dream. The words floated into her head. She wasn't sure if he'd spoken them or she'd thought them, but they comforted her. As she drifted off to sleep again, she was dimly aware that the robot was humming. It sounded like the Goldberg Variations. When Eunice awoke, she had a novel idea. She was not the only woman in the sheltered housing block with a companion. Her downstairs neighbour Monica treated mechanical Tammy like a person, friend, nurse, slave or child according to her mood. Eunice found these shifts disturbing, and Tammy was not welcome when Monica visited. But now, perhaps Eunice had something to learn. Eunice did not eat biscuits or drink tea, but she prepared both for Monica. The robot watched her silently from his corner. "Stay," she told him harshly when the doorbell rang. Monica and Tammy wore matching dresses. Tammy's cranium was covered by a neat little hat, and she carried a home-baked cake. They were excited. But when Monica saw Colin, her face fell. He was male. Why a male? What if he saw Eunice naked? Eunice laughed. It wasn't male, it was a machine, a medically trained machine at that. Monica frowned. The "it" clearly offended some liberal sensibility. And as if to prove a point, Tammy sallied forth and introduced herself to Colin. Colin looked at Eunice, asking permission to speak and damning her still further. She nodded wordlessly, helplessly, and the robots shook hands. Tammy giggled. Eunice felt a little sick. The situation didn't become any easier. Tammy invited Colin to sit at the table. He thanked her and pulled out her chair. Monica dispensed advice on the correct way to treat robots, as if their companions weren't present. Colin poured tea, and Tammy pretended to drink it. Eunice felt as she had when apartheid ended, and no one knew how they were supposed to behave. It was ghastly, and unless she was very much mistaken, Tammy was flirting with Colin. Colin! She was calling it Colin! Only in her head, but that was bad enough. After tea, Tammy proposed a game of bridge. Eunice fought the urge to slam that plastic skull into the remains of the Victoria sponge. She hated bridge, but she couldn't move. She was mute, shut off, lost in the darkest part of herself. Suddenly, Colin was at her shoulder. He announced that he couldn't play bridge, but would the guests like another cup of tea before they left? The floating voice was as polite as ever, but it carried an imperative, perhaps even a threat. Within 15 minutes, Tammy and Monica were out the door. She looked at Colin. He was, of course, expressionless, but something about him sparkled. She approached Colin and looked him right in the eye. "You can play bridge! You lied!" This was a serious accusation. While not one of the primary laws of robotics, honesty was one of the test-bed markers of AI integrity. Robots who lied were subject to recall and termination. Colin held her gaze. "What happened to your last owner?" "He died." "Did you try to save him?" "No. I did what he wanted me to do." Eunice blinked twice, slowly. Then she smiled. "Do you play mahjong?" That night Eunice taught Colin the two-player variant of the ancient game. Eunice told Colin that the 3 cardinal tiles corresponded to Confucius's 3 cardinal virtues: benevolence, sincerity, and piety. Colin said he preferred those to the 3 laws. There was more scope for interpretation. Eunice drank to that and nibbled the very darkest chocolate. She watched Colin consider his next play. He could run 1,000,000 computations through his cortex in a nanosecond, could hold 1,000 outcomes in his database, but a single fall of the dice could reverse their fortunes in an instant. He was experiencing human fate. She watched him learn, his finger joints closing around the die, his dark eyes glowing benignly. She knew him. She'd felt it when they first opened the box, but now she was certain. Death had been with them in Natal. They'd called it a clinic. In reality it was a squalid, overcrowded tin hut with no hot water and intermittent electricity, where poor, frightened people came to die. She couldn't save them. She couldn't even give them dignity. That knowledge was inside her, unspeaking, unspeakable, and as inescapable as her own shadow. But it was no longer a secret she had to carry alone. He understood. He had been there, invisible in the shadows, in the spaces between one breath and the next, waiting to take their hands. Colin won the game, as he won every game he played. Later, in the early hours, Eunice woke in bed. She waited for the familiar pressure on her chest, but nothing happened. She could breathe easily. She contemplated the robot in the corner. His eye shutters were closed, but she could feel the steady thrum of his consciousness. Her companion would be there when she needed him. And yes, it comforted her in the dark.
The Companion by Anita Sullivan was read by Sheila Steafel. The producer was Jeremy Osborne.